Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever it is where you are as you're tuning into this webinar. I'm glad you're with me. This is Foresight is 2020, applying to graduate school, and it's the culmination of the last 3 years of my life as I went through master's and doctoral applications and auditions. I'm just going to jump right in. The very first tip that I would give you is to start early. You need to take advantage of the opportunities when time is your friend and not your enemy. And later in this webinar, I'm going to detail some of the documents that you're going to need to prepare for these applications. And right now, when we have limited access to practice instruments and we shouldn't be leaving the house so often, this is a great time to be sitting at your computer and working on these documents so that you're not scrambling in December or November getting ready for December application deadlines. Work smarter, not harder. We've heard this before, but what I mean here is to really be strategic about the schools you apply to based on the requirements of their applications. You want to be aware of variances in audition repertoire or application requirements because you're going to end up making a lot of work for yourself if you apply to 3 schools with vastly different requirements. It's possible to do that if those are the schools you want to apply to. You just need to be very organized about it. But I found a lot of success in applying to schools with similar requirements so that I wasn't preparing 10 different audition pieces and 5 different sets of documents. Plan ahead financially. We all know that the price of higher education in this country is criminal, and that's another conversation for another day. But what they also don't tell you is that it costs a small fortune to even apply to graduate school. Between application fees, travel expenses, and matriculation fees, I spent close to $2,000 applying to my master's degree. Some general tips with application fees: ask if they will waive the fee. You might have to demonstrate your financial hardship based on you supporting yourself or other situations as your predicament may be, but the worst they can say is no. Often they will waive the fee if you ask them, and that will save you several $100s. With travel expenses, try to lump all of your auditions together so that if you live in Texas, you're not making 4 separate trips to the Northeast. Do all of your Northeast auditions in one trip. And when you're staying in cities, see if there is a community member or member of the studio that's staying in town for auditions that would let you stay with them in their guest room. That could save you hundreds of dollars in lodging expenses. With matriculation fees, there's no way around it. You just need to be aware that when you decide to go to a school, you'll have to pay them several $100s in order for them to matriculate your portfolio and confirm your acceptance for the fall. So set aside some money, start saving now, pull out the pennies and the couch cushions, whatever you have to do. But just be aware it costs a bit of money up front to apply to graduate school. Consider your spring audition schedule. I would suggest taking a heavier load of classes in the fall semester and leaving a lighter load of classes in the spring semester, knowing that you're going to be traveling on most weekends doing auditions and you're going to be getting ready for recitals and such. So take a lighter load of classes. And also, it seems like a good idea in November to apply to 6 or 7 schools to give yourself a lot of options in the spring. But doing 6 or 7 auditions back to back is incredibly grueling. So be realistic about what you can actually accomplish in the spring and don't set yourself up to be stressed and to possibly do worse than you would if you applied to fewer schools and had better auditions. And the last thing I would say is a general tip is pay attention to the vibe you get in the city where you audition. This could be a place where you end up spending a good deal of time. So do you want to live in a city versus a college town? What's the cost of living where you want to live, and what kind of job availability is there in the city where the school is? These are things to bear in mind because you could end up spending 5 to 10 years where you do your master's, depending on if you stay for additional study or if you get a job that you like. So make sure that it's in a city that you want to live in. Now I'm going to detail some of the documents that you'll need to prepare for your applications. And the first is a repertoire list. And this is a good idea to have going anyway. It's just a comprehensive list of all the pieces that you've played. Now, as your list gets bigger, you may take off some of the smaller pieces that are less important, but you want to give an overall overview of the pieces that you've played. Some schools will ask you to indicate pieces that you've performed publicly or pieces that you have memorized. So it's a good idea when you're making that list or editing that list over the summer to go on and mark those pieces that you have performed publicly or that you've memorized or anything else that you think would be helpful. Because that's one less thing you'll have to do in November when you're getting your applications together. If you already have the repertoire list solidified, you just submit it and you're done. There's always a bit of confusion between a resume and a curriculum vitae, so I'm going to detail those quickly. A resume is just 1 to 2 pages maximum, and it shows the professional highlights and it showcases your competence. So this is a brief overview of your academic history, the most important jobs that you've had in the last 5 to 10 years, depending on how long you've been working. But it should not be very long, and it shouldn't go into too much detail. It's just a brief overview. A curriculum vitae, on the other hand, can be anywhere from 2 to 50 pages, depending on how much work you've done. This is a much more comprehensive overview, and it showcases your credentials. So this is academic degrees, as well as maybe who you've studied with and a selection of the classes that you took, awards, research projects, jobs, recitals, anything that you think adds credibility to your application portfolio should go in the CV. So it's just important, if they ask for a resume, they don't want 15 pages. And if they ask for a CV, they want more detail than you can give them in a one-page resume. So be sure to give them exactly what they're looking for. The cover letter accompanies the resume or the CV and is meant to encourage the reader to look at your resume and CV. So this is your chance to introduce yourself, to explain why you're a good fit for the school and the school is a good fit for you, and to add some narrative to your accomplishments. Be very careful about reading for prompts for the cover letter. Some schools will want you to respond to a very specific prompt for the letter, or the statement of purpose, or the letter of intent, personal statement, whatever they call it. Some people want a prompt, some people will want just a general cover letter. So be sure that you're responding exactly to what they want. And that may end up being 2 or 3 different documents, depending on the schools you're applying to. So again, when you're mapping out your applications, be aware of exactly what they want. We're all familiar with letters of recommendation. We've done them in undergrad, perhaps for a job application. I think it's important to provide a portfolio of letters. Often you'll have 3 for graduate applications, and the way that I broke it down is I had a musical recommendation from my apply teacher, a professional or an academic recommendation from my boss or an academic teacher, and then a personal recommendation from a mentor or another teacher or boss. So in this way, your letters give a comprehensive overview of you as a person. And don't be afraid to heavily prompt the person writing your letter. If they've agreed to write the letter of recommendation, they obviously want to write you a good letter. So give them as much information as possible and say, my apply teacher is already talking about my musicianship, so can you please talk about my work in the academic setting? Or can you please talk about what I'm like as a person and what it's like to work with me in general? In that way, your letters all work together as a portfolio. After your audition, you've submitted the application, you've done the auditions, the whole world just stands still. It's an awful month of just waiting. And there will come a time in early April when your acceptance letters start coming in. Unless that school gives you a full ride with a stipend, appeal the financial aid. What happens is schools will send out letters to more people than they expect to come to the school. And so they'll send out, perhaps you are student X, and they also send student Y a letter, and you both get half scholarships. But student Y decides to go to a different school, and they give up their scholarship at the school you want to go to. So if you have written a letter saying, I want to come to this school, but I need more financial assistantship, they're going to be aware that this person just gave up their half scholarship, and they'll put it with yours, and suddenly you have a full ride, and all you did was ask for it. The worst they can say is, no, I'm sorry, we just can't do any better, and you make your decision based on that. But ask the apply teacher at that school to write a letter of support for your financial aid appeal, and don't be afraid to ask for money and to stand up for yourself. Know what you're worth and fight for what you're worth. That is a very brief overview of some tips for applying to graduate school. It can be an intimidating process to go through, especially if you're leaving the school that you've known and loved for the last 4 or 5 years. And, I didn't really feel like I was an adult on my own until I moved to Baltimore to go to graduate school. So I know it's intimidating. I want to try to demystify that process for people and encourage people to have more success with applying to graduate school. So if there are questions that you have that are not answered in this very brief webinar, feel free to send me an email or to reach out on my website. Both of those are attached on the handout. And reach out. I'll be happy to answer any question I know the answer to or point you in the right direction if I don't know the answer. So stay well, stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you whenever the world calms down.